will spare no effort to achieve these objectives. Thank the interpreters once again for having stayed with us beyond the normal hour. Thank you.
À Monsieur Bill Fletcher, membre du comité directeur de la U.S. campaign to end the Israeli occupation. Mr. Bill Fletcher, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank the committee for permitting me to address it this afternoon. My name is Bill Fletcher, Jr. I'm the executive editor of the online magazine blackcommentator.com and a member of the leadership committee of the coalition known as the U.S. Campaign to End the Israeli Occupation. I'm the immediate past president of the advocacy group Trans-Africa Forum, which was the leading voice within the United States of America against South African apartheid and white minority rule in Africa. I'm also a longtime trade union activist. I sit before you today to discuss a contemporary apartheid, that practiced by the State of Israel against the Palestinian people. As an African American in and from the United States, I am keenly aware of the similarities between the systems of Israeli apartheid, South African apartheid, and homegrown apartheid in the United States of America, once known as Jim Crow segregation. Despite every effort of the Israeli state to wrap its actions in religious garments, to claim a God-given Judaic exclusive right for its actions, the description of the racial differential or national ethnic differential that exists between the officially sanctioned Jewish citizens of Israel and the Palestinians within Israel, those in exile and those in the occupied territories, sounds all too familiar. It is also far from holy. Notwithstanding the efforts of heroic individuals such as William Patterson, Paul Robeson, and Malcolm X to bring the case of African Americans before the United Nations, the international ramifications of the oppression suffered here were often inconveniently ignored by the great powers of the global North. The South African apartheid system was to a great extent modeled on the Jim Crow system in the United States, a fact noted by many people in South Africa and the global South. The United Nations failed to take up the challenge of racism in my own country a generation ago. It must not fail to take up the struggle against Israeli apartheid today. The realities of the Israeli apartheid system, in contrast to South Africa, were often hidden from view, at least outside of Israel and later the occupied territories. It was, however, the close collaboration, including military and nuclear collaboration between the Israeli regime and the South African apartheid regime, at a point when the South African apartheid regime had become an international pariah state that raised more than a few eyebrows and encouraged many people to more closely examine the theories and workings of the two states. The parallel between the Israeli apartheid system and the Jim Crow system under which African Americans suffered and died here in the United States also helps to explain a phenomena that seems to puzzle many mainstream commentators. How is it that there exists such a relatively large reservoir of sympathy among African Americans in the United States for the cause of the Palestinians? It is a vicious slander to assert that such sympathy is based on anti-Jewish sentiments, though I would be naive to ignore that such sentiments do exist in some isolated quarters. Rather, for African Americans, we can at one and the same time stand with the Jewish victims of the Nazi Holocaust, while at the same time reject the Israeli apartheid system and its victimization of the Palestinian people. The horrors of the Holocaust, as the great Martinican writer Aimé Césaire pointed out, were not unprecedented, but found their basis in the brutal Holocaust committed against the peoples of the global South by the colonial powers and the settler states. It was based on that shared history that African Americans viscerally understood and therefore placed ourselves in opposition to the racist motivations that lay behind the actions of the Nazis and later the Italian fascists in their persecution and then attempts at annihilation of the Jewish people. Yet none of this, that is, none of the reality of the Holocaust suffered by European Jews, excuses what has happened to the Palestinian people since World War II and especially since May 1948. And it is this that many people in what is colloquially known as Black America understand so well. The Israeli apartheid system that expropriates land from the Palestinians, restricts mixed marriages, condemns Palestinians to separate and inferior education, and repudiates their internationally recognized right to return to their land and their homes simply carries with it the same stench of the decadent and oppressive system that we came to know here as Jim Crow, oppression, and segregation. The work of your committee and the attention that you devote to the situation facing the Palestinian people receives insufficient notice in the mainstream media. As a result, the actual conditions of the Palestinian people are not fully understood in many quarters, most especially in the United States. This year's gathering comes at a critical moment. The release of the Goldstone Report, the international attention it received, and its adoption by the United Nations Human Rights Council and the General Assembly are representative of a shifting discourse on the conditions of the Palestinian people and their struggle for self-determination and full human rights. The challenge of the Goldstone Report, however, is to move beyond discourse to a shift in actual policy, to make real the report's commitment to accountability. That is a challenge for all of us, but most especially for you, the United Nations, because so far, despite clear evidence of the flaunting of international law by the Israeli government, whether through the violation of the Hague Conventions or Geneva Conventions, when it comes to the occupation, few actual sanctions have been taken in defense of the Palestinian people or to punish the occupiers for their transgressions. As a citizen of the United States of America, I'm reminded of this on a daily basis. As you're aware, the Congress of the United States voted to condemn the Goldstone Report, distorting the findings of the report and declaring it to be biased with no concrete evidence to support such allegations. Not only disrespected Justice Goldstone, the report, the United Nations Human Rights Council, and indeed the United Nations as a whole, as well as the Palestinian people, but also disrespected the intelligence of the people of the United States. We in the U.S. and global civil society, however, have no intention of allowing the effort to bury the Goldstone Report to succeed. It is therefore my hope that the planned Gaza Freedom March, scheduled for 1 January 2010, will be another opportunity to call attention to the Goldstone Report, but also, and more critically, re-raise the world's attention to the continuing violations of the human rights of the Palestinian people of Gaza at the hands of the forces of the Israeli state. As important as is the Goldstone Report, the analysis of the atrocities committed at the time of the Israeli aggression against Gaza represents only a part of the overall picture. The Goldstone Report opens the door to a broader discussion of the Israeli occupation and the question of the suppression of the Palestinian people's right to self-determination, including the rights of the Palestinian refugees, and equally important, the denial of full equality to the Palestinian minority who are citizens of the State of Israel. The Israeli occupation has come to be broadly understood as an apartheid arrangement. Civil society around the world, including the UN-accredited International Coordinating Network on Palestine, has been working for years to build and broaden public understanding of that concept. Within the United States, the U.S. campaign to end the Israeli occupation has made the issue of apartheid a major part of our work. The courageous stand taken by former U.S. President Carter in his book, Palestine, Peace Not Apartheid, has dramatically helped to increase awareness of the dramatic similarities in the situation faced by the Palestinians in the occupied territories and those faced by non-whites in apartheid-era South Africa. Whether one is discussing the illegal seizure of Palestinian land and it's being granted to Israeli settlers, whether one is dealing with the roads that are restricted to Israelis alone, the creation of an internationally condemned separation wall, or the ethnic cleansing of occupied East Jerusalem, again and again the situation and circumstances conform to the norms that the United Nations established more than 35 years ago in defining apartheid as a crime. What was particularly noteworthy, I might add, regarding the steps taken by the United Nations in the 1973 Convention on the Suppression and Punishment of the Crime of Apartheid was that it defined apartheid not as a crime limited to South African context, but as it was stated at the time, the crime of apartheid, which shall include similar policies and practices of racial segregation and discrimination